Okay, class, today we're going to talk about biodiversity in ecosystems. So, the ability for an ecosystem to remain and for the life to continue despite of changing conditions that can happen, we know, in nature is called sustainability. So, sustainability is the ability for an ecosystem to remain flourishing, to be stable, that kind of stuff. One of the most important factors of an ecosystem sustainability is the variety of species that inhabit the ecosystem. So today we know that there are millions of species that live on Earth. The variety of living things is known as biological diversity, or more commonly known as biodiversity. So definitely write down that definition. Biodiversity is the variety of living things on Earth. Bio means life, diversity means different, variety. So, what is biodiversity? Biodiversity is the varied of life both within and between species and include the biodiversity of the species, their genetic material, and it also includes the diversity of the ecosystem types. So definitely make sure that you know all of this. Biodiversity is not only the variety of life between the species, but it also includes their genetic material and the different types of ecosystems, like a desert, swamp, grasslands, forest, tundra. That's biodiversity. So, which of the following best describes biodiversity? A, the variety of species, genetic material, and ecosystems found on Earth. B, the number of trees in a forest. C, the size of fish in a stream. Or D, the difference of the one species from another. So go ahead and pause the video, and on the left-hand side of your C notes, I want you to tell me whether you think number one is A, B, C, or D. Well, the answer is A. Species, genetic material, and ecosystems. Okay, so let's talk about the definition of a species. Species diversity is the number of different species of plants and animals that live in an ecosystem. The more variety of a species, the more organisms there will be in a food chain or a food web. Now, I know it's been a long time since we talked about food chains at the very beginning of the year, but obviously the more species that live in a particular ecosystem, the greater it's going to be stable. Because if one species goes, the whole food web isn't going to crash. This makes an ecosystem more stable and less likely to be disrupted by changes in the numbers of one species. So if it's very small biodiversity and one species crashes, like I said, the whole food web and ecosystem could crash, especially if it was a producer or a primary consumer. So biodiversity helps ecosystems to maintain it, including the food web. So an increase or a reduction of a particular species greatly can change the dynamic of an ecosystem. An ecosystem that is stable will be more able to tolerate changes. When biodiversity is low, changes can cause vital elements in the ecosystem, such as a food chain, to collapse, where the entire ecosystem will fall. So let's consider the food chain we have below. We have algae, which is our producer, snails, which is our primary consumer, and a duck, which is our secondary consumer. Now, remember at the beginning of the year, we talked about how the arrows represent the flow of energy. So what would happen to the duck if the snails were wiped out by disease? Well, according to this food chain, that's all the duck would eat. So if its food source was gone, what do you think would happen to the duck? They would suffer too. They would either die or move to another location. With more species in the food web, the outcome of the duck may not be the same. So now let's look at a food web instead of just that food chain. Now we have algae and floating algae balls, which you've probably seen those if you've ever gone to Lake in the Ponds during the summer. I know I see them all the time. Those are our producers. Then you have your mosquito larvae, water fleas, tadpoles as our primary consumers, minnows, dragonfly larvae, and ducks as our secondary, even third level consumers. So the duck wouldn't be as affected if it could still eat mosquitoes and other things. Mosquito larvae. If if the snail's wiped out. So if you remove a species from a food web that has more species, it is less disruptive. So let's get into genetic material. Genetic diversity is a variety of all the genetic material that is present in an organism. We kind of talked about this when we went into sexual versus asexual reproduction. One of the advantages of sexual reproduction is it has diversity, and that was an advantage, so now we're going to find out why. Varieties in inheritable characteristics gives rise to adaptation in species, including resistance to diseases. If an organism is always going to be an identical clone to the parent, it is never going to be able to change and adapt. To make a species more able to cope with changes in the environment, you have to adapt. So number 2, again, write the answer on the left-hand side. Why is diversity of genetic material important to the sustainability of an ecosystem? A, it enables species to adapt and cope with changes in the environment. Or B, it prevents species from being apart on the food chain so they can live longer. Well, the answer is obviously A. The other one's just silly. So why is biodiversity important? It keeps ecosystems healthy and stable, and it enables them to function for a long time. Healthy, long-lasting ecosystems are essential to our planet. They keep gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide in the air stable. They help to recycle nutrients, like all the decomposers bring nutrients and organic matter back into the cycle. They keep our climate stable, and they keep the earth stable by controlling erosion. All 4 of these are major points on why biodiversity is important, so please write all 4 of them down. Ecosystems are also very important into the way that we live our lives. Plants and animals provide us with food. They can provide us with shelter. They provide us with fuel, materials, and clothing, and even medicine. So think about trying to live your life without a house, without a fire, without clothes, without medicine. I mean, plant and animals, even though they are living things, they help us as humans, and they're so important. So how do we preserve biodiversity? Biodiversity of ecosystems is essential to preserve the quality of life that we have on Earth. Not the quantity, but the quality. We don't care about the number, but how well it is. The loss of a species will lead to the loss of many of that resources that are valuable to us. Our climate and atmosphere can change in a way that makes it difficult to live. So question 3. Biodiversity is important for which of the following reasons? It keeps our ecosystem stable. It preserves resources that are valuable to us. It keeps the conditions of the planet suitable for humans to live. Or D, all of the above. It is D, all of the above. So human activity is one of the biggest threats to biodiversity. We rely on natural resources, but we are overusing them and causing damage to upset the balance of the ecosystems. Now, you know how we talked about homeostasis is that internal balance within a living thing? Equilibrium is the internal balance of an ecosystem. For example, global warming. Because we are burning so many fossil fuels and putting a lot of ozone in the atmosphere, it is causing global warming, which is melting ice caps and affecting all living things that rely on them, like polar bears and that whole general area. We can change the variety of species through advances in genetics and selective breeding, which we've kind of been talking about, but sometimes we can introduce species into an area where they're not usually found. This can affect a species that already lives there. This is what we call an intrusive species, and a big condition is happening in the Atlantic Ocean where lionfish People would take lionfish as a pet and then they would decide to release them into the ocean. Well, lionfish aren't normally found in the Atlantic, and so when they got there, they had no known predators. So they would reproduce crazy because nobody was killing them off and keeping their population size in check. So therefore, they're overeating all the resources and other animals are dying. So a gray squirrel would be another example that was introduced to the UK and now outnumbers the British red squirrel. So it's causing another species to become endangered or even extinct. Question 4. The introduction to a new species to a habitat could never be caused by reproducing a biological diversity. True or false? It's false. So in summary, in this presentation, you understand the meaning and the importance of biodiversity, the threats to it. So if you need to review or rewind, go back through, and I'll see y'all tomorrow.